No, I mean, architecture is political. We gotta add that stuff.
Indeed.
We're tearing down communities to build multifamily, and you have to understand we are creating displacement. You're displacing Black and brown folks, and they don't come back.
Half of this podcast would be dedicated to the history of Tyler House, my journey and my discoveries, and hey, I'm going to solve this housing problem.
Hey guys, what's up? My name is Melissa Daniels. This is the Architecturalist Political Podcast where Black and brown folks talk about architecture. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and be part of my storytelling. I had so many plans for Black History Month. It's really sad that I didn't get an opportunity to do what I really wanted to do. And the reason why is work. Part of it is 9-to-5 work, but what I had in mind took a lot of work. And I had two things in mind. One was to set up a series, a webinar series, or maybe in person. If it was in person, then I needed to find a venue. What would that venue look like? I have a venue in mind, actually, which would be open to the public, which is what I wanted. I didn't want it to just be for architects, by architects. I wanted to be more about the community as a whole. The second idea I had was series around DC specifically. And this is video. It's not just audio, but video. And that would have, not only I had to go to the sites, I had to record myself, maybe even ask somebody to record. If not, then I had to set up a tripod or not, right? I could just shoot the scenes and then go back and post-production and edit that stuff, which everybody does that now. But it's a lot of work that I just did not feel like doing. Actually, there's three things. The last thing was to just I'm going to do this anyway. Hopefully I get it done this year. But to just a summary of some of my guests. It's a lot of people that I've talked to. So just a refresher, or ones who back in the 2020s, early 2020s, when this first started to now, because some people haven't heard everything or maybe some good tidbits, and just have a discussion about what people have said during a podcast. And I really want to do that part. I thought about our guest now, Tiffany Millner, who is an architect. In the episode, I mentioned that I stalked her damn near almost 10 years ago. Yeah, let's say 10 years ago. I've been saying that a lot on these episodes. Like, I've stalked you. And I don't think that's healthy. Tiffany Millner, who's a Jersey girl, got her bachelor's degree from Temple. And after graduation, she worked at architectural firms, which we've all done at some point of our lives. But that wasn't fulfilling. And when I say stalked, and I clarified this in the episode, it's like she had the career path that I wanted. She got to work with kids, which is something that I've thought about doing, but she got to do it on a professional level. I'm like, oh, wow, that's really cool. She wrote a book, a self-published book called 200 something, and I'll link that in the show notes, which documents her journey and struggle and how she didn't even know that there was only, at the time, 200 and something licensed architects versus I already knew. But I wanted to be in that range number and nowhere near that. Oh, I didn't even mention this. So we met, a good friend of mine, Ray, shout out to Ray, introduced me to her. And we talked a little bit. I'm like, you're cool. And she's, hey, you're cool too. And then we ran into each other a couple more times. And then I was like, hey, and I emailed her. I was like, hey, you should be on my podcast. She's like, okay, sure. She received an award, the 2021 Thomas U. Walter Award, AIA Philadelphia, and has also, been prominent in her alumni. A good conversation about architecture, working in the field, and just being real about it, and our passions and how we want to go beyond and above and getting to the root of the problem, the systemic problem, I should say. And how do we deal with that? How do we conquer that so that neither of us leave the profession? Nowadays it's called alternate paths. It's a whole different topic. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I sure did. As always, everything's in the show notes if you want to know more about Tiffany. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Thank you so much for reaching out to me. I appreciate it. I don't typically talk to people. I'm one of those extroverted introverts. So this is actually part of my professional development for 2024.
So you usually just say no?
For the most part, I'll find some reason as to why, but it'll always probably be about, can't we talk about that right now? Don't feel like talking about that. Oof, that was PTSD. So,
well, just to let you know, this podcast is also a therapy session.
I appreciate it.
I've said this throughout episodes that this podcast has been therapeutic for me in talking to other people and then reflecting. Because once I record, I play back, edit to listen, right? And when you're talking to people, you're interviewing people, having these conversations, you're in the moment. So then when you edit this, you're out of the moment. And then you start reflecting on what you said, what you could have said, but also like your own life. So it's really therapeutic. Prior to me hitting record on this call, I said I stalked you since 2009. And that's a long time to stalk somebody.
It's a long time.
Thing is that we're the same age. And I said to you that you had the career trajectory that I wanted. It's weird. Like, time you had your sons is the time that, man, I don't have any kids. Or the time that you got your license, and you just mentioned you got your license and you got married at the same time. Like, oh.
So getting married, I guess I didn't have a choice in that. Having kids, I probably have a choice in that either. The only thing I did have a choice in was getting licensed, and I really didn't want to do that. But it was one of those things where it's like you kind of got to finish what you started. And I knew that I'd probably call my parents every day while I was at school saying I was going to threaten to quit, threatening to come home. And they were like, no. So, I was like, okay, fine, you're paying for this. So stayed, endured. But by the time you got to the license, it was like, okay, well, I pretty much figured I knew I wanted to do something else after working in a firm for a little bit. And it's like, do you really want to get licensed, Tiff? I was like, I don't know, man. But again, I talked to my parents and they pretty much said, well, you can't do anything else until you at least get the license. So that's what I did. That was kind of my ticket to freedom as far as I was concerned.
Was it really? Did it feel like freedom afterwards or?
Absolutely not. The benefits, I can't say that I can quantify the benefits of being licensed in a firm. At that time, it was 2009, working in a mid-sized firm. But I mean, I wasn't in a position to stamp drawings. So just in terms of like a personal benefit, it was self-satisfying. And then ultimately just understanding that there were so few Black female architects at the time, like that just blew my mind. I had no idea before that happened. I literally got licensed and got an email from Dennis Mann, like, oh, congratulations. I'm like, who is this mysterious man that just showed up in my inbox? And how do you know about me? So that's how I found out about the directory. And then back in the day, it was like literally numbers. So you would go on there and you would see your name and then you would see I was 233. So that's something that I didn't realize that was part of my identity until it happened. So it was interesting. But beyond that piece of self-satisfaction and I guess recognition, I guess I feel like it's benefited me more as like a confidence piece and street cred as I was pursuing other things at the time.
What was the inspiration behind writing your book, 200 something?
To be quite honest with you, full transparency, I knew I needed like a creative outlet. So working in a firm, and it was a good firm. It was a good church home. It had a lot of different verticals. So there was multifamily, there was entertainment, hospitality, healthcare, which I kind of got stuck on a little bit. But it was good. It was a lot of variety, but there still wasn't creativity. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we were like a service-oriented firm. So we're architect of record. There wasn't really many design opportunities. And if there were design opportunities, they were going to the younger staff who probably just came out of school, to be quite honest with you, because I guess it was a lower price point. They can spend more time and SketchUp, at the time. So as you elevate in a firm, the creativity and the things that you came into it in the first place kind of go away because now you have to delegate. And I don't know, it's just, I guess everybody comes into this profession for different reasons and they have different motivations, but I was an artist and I was a creator. So that elevation and ascension in a firm kind of really, it didn't soothe my soul so much. So I just knew I needed something on the outside. And actually, what happened was I got married in 2009, got registered in 2009, but the wedding photographer that I chose, very small business, husband and wife, extremely creative, graphic designer, photographer, videographer. But I was like, ooh, that looks fun. That looks interesting. And just talking back and forth. And he was someone who was in an industry and left and rediscovered his passion. And ultimately, I started interning at night. So I literally worked during the day. And at night, I interned till about maybe 11, 12 at night. Seriously, I don't know how the hell my husband let me do this, but he knew that there was something missing and he let me do this. So I interned at a photography studio pretty much for free, for pro bono, but in exchange got an enormous amount of education. So I learned the entire Adobe Creative Suite, put it into practice. So learned photography, started producing his wedding albums. So taking the photography, doing the post-production and in terms of the editing, doing the graphic design layout. So all of this stuff was fun to me, but I was learning an enormous amount of skills that literally was the platform and the foundation for me to have a consultancy.
Going back to working at a firm, you felt that, and I read and watched that from the traditional architecture firms, and I think that we have this in common, is applying for a firm or even working in the firm, you feel that something's not right. I just told the story on my previous podcast that I wanted to work at this particular firm and they were excited, but the timing wasn't right. And I really wanted to finish a project at another firm. And then when I went to the real interview, I thought I had it because I talked to the higher ups and stuff and they were really interested in me. And they saw my resume and I didn't get the job. In the end, it was like, oh, sorry, we can't offer you for the job. Good luck and get licensed. And that was just, you knew I wasn't licensed. Why did you waste my time? It was a complete waste of time. I was watching, you did something with women in architecture over in Philly, talking about your award, congrats. And you had a similar experience.
Yeah, I didn't fit the demographic at the time. It's always going to be something off. It's just something that you can't provide, that you just don't. And I hate to feel like they try to find something. It's almost like they look too deep to try to identify a flaw sometimes. And it's unfortunate. But that's why I guess inherently we always felt like we got to do above and beyond more than most just to kind of get equalized or find equality, right? So yeah, something was off. I mean, something was off. The firm that I was just referencing. So I actually left that firm twice. So I quit that job twice. The first time things just didn't feel right. You're working on projects and the projects that are coming in that you're getting delegated to, just why? Is it because the client's Black? Is it because the client's brown? Like how come I can't work on that project? That's like the design jewel. That's what's happening in here. And you have younger staff working on it. But no, Tiffany, we just need you to work on this thing because we know you're going to do it right. And it's like, okay, but at that particular firm at that time, I knew that my time was not, I knew that I had no interest in serving in leadership, being business partners with, obviously there was something off. Like it wasn't as inclusive and I didn't feel like I belonged in the space. So I actually left. I left the first time after I cultivated a client for years. It was working in the hospitality realm and it was just me and a partner in charge. So there was no staff. It was just me. And as far as, partners in charge, what do they do? I'm kidding. They do not. But it was just me, so it was one of those opportunities where you feel like, okay, yes, this is an opportunity, but I'm also being thrown to the wolves and to the fire because this was like a national client and they had me going up and down the East Coast, flying Florida, Boston for this client. And then one day there's a merger with this client, and there's a merger and there's a new client now. So we have more projects and more things are coming in. So where I was like the sole person cultivating this client, doing the jobs, knowing that this is like my niche, just having something to kind of hold on to. So it's like, you kind of want to create that air of being indispensable, right? So that was my piece. I was hospitality girl. So more and more projects come in. Now I'm training other project managers to do this work. And now there may be 3 points of contact instead of just the one. And I respect that. So a certain point in this entire journey, the partner in charge I've been working with this entire time is like, okay, well, no, we got a new client now. And ultimately they only want 1 point of contact. So he literally took me and this other guy out to lunch and essentially sat us down and was like, okay, well, he picks you. And I'm just like, okay, well, what does that mean for me? Oh, Tiffany, we're just going to stay. That position is going to probably do more traveling, do the golf outings, smoke the cigars. Essentially, the man is saying, it's a good old boys club. So we just really need you to stay in the office and make sure we can get the drawings done on time, on budget, right? And I'm just like, okay. So at that point, it's numb. And this is, I guess, around like 2011, 2010. So I'm not really thinking, is this what I think it is? Like, it didn't even compute that that's what was happening. So like you say, you can kind of look back and say, oh, I should have said this, or I should have said that. I should have tried to advocate for myself. I said nothing. I didn't know what to say at that point. I just wanted to ensure that I still was able to pay my bills, right? And this was a time when we didn't talk about these things at all. And at that time, again, I was the only one in the firm. So why would I even kind of risk that position, tokenism or not? Like, why would I risk that? So needless to say, but that situation was a cancer. It became a cancer and it eats at you. And then you just start questioning other things. Well, if they're not going to have my back in this, then what are they going to have my back in? Are they going to support me? Are they going to try to go out of their way to make me feel included? If not, then values, mission, all that stuff isn't aligning. So that was, just knowing that in the back of my head, that was probably the first time that I left. Obviously, I went back, right? But it was awakening to know in terms of trust and positioning, and no matter what you do, sometimes it's just not going to be enough.
Why'd you go back?
I went back because I was actually asked, I was called to duty by the school district of Philadelphia to teach. I wasn't even looking to leave, but again, it was just that cancer. So it's one of those times, like if you get the call, it's like, oh, if something's not right, you're going to answer the call. If everything's great, you're going to, decline. But so I answered the call, and they needed a teacher to teach architecture at a high school level. And throughout the time I was working at the firm, I was heavily involved in mentoring and working with the school district on other levels through other kind of mentoring programs. So they knew of me and they needed someone at the time. So I tried it, and just thinking that it would have been a similar experience from the mentoring experiences that I have, but it was the total opposite. Like everything you have seen, if you had watched Lean on Me, I am not even joking. Like it was incredible, the amount of investment that was asked of teachers in educational environment. So to be quite honest, full transparency, that career change lasted all of 2 weeks. And it was literally me calling my office back, calling my supervisor at the time, like, okay, I'm going to need my 401k information. And they were like, well, why are you not at school? And I was like, well, I don't think I'm going back. Well, then why don't you just come on back home? I said, oh God, no. So what did I do? I came on back home, but it was definitely eye-opening. So that experience alone just showed me, on the other side, in the veil, just pulling that back, like, wow, like there's so much going on outside of this firm. Maybe it's time for me to try to see what else I could do in a more controlled environment.
So you left the second time. I assume it didn't change in those 2 weeks, right?
No, nothing changed. I don't want to say it was worse, but they welcomed me back. And this is after throwing me a going away party. So I was like, oh God. I mean, they had the face on the cake and everything. I was like,
oh Lord, they spent Costco money boy. Oh my gosh.
I was like, well, I'm back, guys. Thank you. Like, thank you for bringing me back. But at that time, coming back, it just didn't feel right because before I had something, right? So that was my thing. Hospitality was my thing. And when I came back, you just get, put on certain projects. And sometimes it's like emergency damage control. Like, you got to get the gun in, get the hired gun to come and save the day. And it's like, who really wants to deal with that? So, just knowing that there wasn't anything that I could call mine anymore, I knew it was a matter of time. So at that point, I was already licensed. I had my street cred. By then, I've already started to cultivate a client base essentially on the outside. And this is in graphic design. There were a couple community groups that were tapping me for some things. Obviously, I still had the photographer studio who was tapping me for things and actually, tossing some ducats here and there. So it was good. And not to mention, I was also doing some architecture, but you can't talk about that because that's dirty, right? But doing a little bit of architecture on the side, nothing too extravagant, but just something to keep the creative chops up. And it came to a point where it was like, you finished a project. Well, I finished a project, and that Monday, we're going to sit and talk about the new project that we're going to start. And I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. I don't want to start a new project. I don't feel like it. So that was Monday. And this is when I guess I snapped and become a different person. My goodness. I literally went in and told the principal in charge, like, yeah, I don't think I want to do this anymore. It's like, well, what does that mean? It's like, I don't know. I don't know what that means, but I'm a Leo. I don't know. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I do not have a poker face to save my life, but I knew that either I said something or they was going to have to deal with grumpy black tip all day. And who wants to do that? So I said something and he was like, all right, well, listen, just think about it. Think about what you're saying. What do you want to do? What do you want from me? What can we do for you? And it was amazing. Like they cared. They wanted to understand how they could make me happy. Again, I said nothing about what I just said about why I left in the first place. This still didn't even come out, right? That story only came out literally a couple of years ago. But I didn't say anything. And I just knew that there was nothing they could really offer me. So, I came back and we talked about it again on Thursday. And he was like, well, how much do you want? I was like, well, there's really no price to buy my soul. I said that. And he knew that that was it. And the next day I wrote my letter and gave my 2 weeks because there really was no price that could keep me there to kind of deal, knowing that that wasn't really truly a place that was interested in supporting and elevating me.
I went on this journey. I was at a firm for a long time, almost 10 years. And then I realized that the projects they were giving me were great, but I didn't have any friends there. I was the only there was this other Black woman, but I put a but in it, but she was African. She wasn't Black American like me. And I was the only one. Only other Black women there were the admin staff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up hanging out with them. But when I do that, I kind of separated myself from the architecture people. And I just got tired of being alone. I felt alone. Like I went to lunch by myself. Or, I had other friends who worked nearby, but for the most part, I was alone. And I can't go through the rest of my life feeling isolated at work. I spent 8 to 12 hours, And so then I went to another firm and I made friends. Like I have friends there to this day, but it was the corporate culture that I just couldn't stand. It was the typical corporate culture. I knew I could not progress in that firm. I just knew it. So at that point, I was jumping firm to firm to firm. Do you think that if you had done that, would you have stayed with this traditional firm path, or was this a representation of all firms in Philadelphia? Or you were in Philly, right? Or no?
Yeah, I was in Philly at the time. Oh no, that was the representation of everybody. That was my second firm out of school. The first firm was definitely more corporate, so I empathize with that. And that's where I did just was siloed. I had a couple friends there, The second firm was more, the culture was more, it was younger, it was more welcoming, it wasn't as corporate. But when I left there, I said, I'm not starting over in another firm. I don't want to meet any new people. I don't want to have to navigate office politics. And I didn't want to be the token again. And, I know that there's power in that position, but knowing what I knew and how we say, oh, you need to diversify. And this is like my job now, right? You have to diversify your project teams, this and that. But what I went through at that firm, the client requested to work with someone that looked like them. So what did I have to stand on? So in that instance, that could happen again. It didn't matter who I was, or what I had to bring to the table. If the client is requesting something, the client is requesting something. So at that point, no, I knew I wasn't going to work in another traditional firm.
Let's talk about the sugaring. So you had a taste of public schools.
Yes.
Philadelphia public school system, and you were like, I want more.
I did. I said, my God, we need to save the world. So, like I said, I was a mentor with a mentoring program, a national mentoring program that has affiliates on the local level across the country. And it was an amazing experience because I guess that was the piece that I didn't know that I was missing, but just by talking about it, just talking about architecture, it brings you back to try to remember why you did this in the first place, and to see people kind of intrigued by it. I was like, oh, well, that started to be that creative outlet or something that was a little bit more soul satisfying than just doing red lines and construction documents. So at the time. So I mentored for quite some time through the firm, through the support of the firm. Everybody, that was their community service initiative. And they gave an amazing support. They paid for all of our time to do that. It was incredible. And then interestingly enough, when I made that transition out of the firm the second time, there was a job opening for the executive director of that mentoring program in Philadelphia. So I put my hand up for it. It was awesome. I was like, look at this alignment. Let me go. I put my hand up, interviewed probably about 2 to 3 times. By the time we got to the third interview, I was pregnant. So am I talking to my husband? I'm like, okay, well, do I say something? I was like, because at the time they were looking for somebody that was, I guess, the beginning of the year, but they knew they needed somebody on the ground to do this mentoring program, get it up and running, go into the schools, do the recruitment and all of that by September, October. I was due in September. I was like, how's this going to work? What do I say? So I was like, well, can't not say anything. So I said something, and whether or not that was held against me, I don't know, maybe, but I didn't get the job. And this is after, I felt like I went in there after mentoring with the program for almost 7 years. I knew exactly what was wrong with the program, what I was going to do to fix it, and here are the strategic ways we're going to get there. So they didn't want that. I don't know if they didn't want that. They didn't want me. They didn't want this baby. That's fine. It was awesome because at that time I needed to kind of just focus on here, instead of having the stress of having this mentoring program up and running. So it's fine. I gave birth early. It was like August. My first son was a month early. And I get a text. I'm in the hospital. Melissa, I'm in the hospital. I get a text. They're going to call you. And I was like, excuse me. And this is the person that texted me was my old supervisor at my old job, who I mentored with at that time. He was like, they're going to text you. They're going to call you. They're going to do something or reach out to you. Whoever they just hired went AWOL. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? So
it was that bad. Like
real life, they could not find this woman that they hired, and people are doing Google searches, found out she took another job somewhere else. Like, I'm not even like, this is adults like behaving this way. So I said, okay, well, I just gave birth. So now y'all got to wait. And at that point, he was like, if you even want it, because you were disrespectful in the beginning, right? So I literally did get a call. I got a call by the time I got home, and they were like, look, the job is yours if you want it. And I was like, are you serious? but you need to hurry up because we need to get this joint popping, and I was just like, so what do you do? Do you say no to this amazing opportunity to create change and be a change maker in your immediate community? No, you suck it up and you just deal with the fact that they were disrespectful, know who they are. You take the job and you keep it moving. So that's what I did. I had a C-section, and then about 60, not even 60 days, maybe 40 days later, I assumed position as the executive director for that program. And what I learned those 2 weeks teaching, that was probably all I needed to kind of build a better foundation for the program, because I knew what it was like inside. I knew who we were needing to talk to. I knew who needed to be there to advocate for the students. And without those personal relationships, the program was going to die. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we saw. There weren't any strategic partnerships or relationships with the teachers, with the administration, with the schools. It was almost just like a catch-all. And that created a lot of the problems. You kind of have to hold people accountable. Sometimes you kind of have to incentivize, unfortunately, things sometimes. So just putting a better structure in place in terms of the recruitment, that increased our retention. And that was probably one of the biggest wins, I guess, when I was head of that ship.
How long were you there?
In that position, probably about 7 years, maybe about 7 years. And what I was doing in Philadelphia, national office wanted to be replicated. So I literally split my time for about 3 of those years where I was the executive director. I had to hire a consultant, but I was running Philadelphia. And I was also doing strategic communications and programming for the national office in tandem, because whatever I did in Philly, we needed to scale up to kind of seed the other affiliates. That was a long time coming to create those roles. The role in national, it was created for me. There was no position like that. So that it felt good to be recognized in that regard, but knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have done that. Given away so much in that regard, but you grow up and you learn.
So you grew statewide or national-wide, or it was statewide?
First, Philadelphia-wide. So we were able to expand from Philadelphia, the suburbs, and then we crossed the river over into Camden. And so we were able to reach a lot more students in a more impactful way, just by having these intentional relationships with the schools and trying to be partners with them instead of saying, oh, this is just an after-school program, just send your kids. It needed to be more collaborative. And then just coming up with processes, and not to say checklists, but best practices about working with students. I mean, ultimately, the program prided itself on diversifying the profession, all the professions. And I took pause to that later in my tenure with them. I guess I always took a little pause with that because they weren't necessarily diversifying the profession, but you're definitely a pathway and entree to career exposure. But it just seemed like it promises a lot, and there's so much work that needs to be done on the local level. And it's hard because who's doing this work? It's volunteer work. And what your day is like. Do you sometimes feel like peeling away at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock to be an inspiration after dealing with a contractor?
Right.
you gotta flip it up real quick sometimes. So it's difficult in a lot of ways.
Nowadays, you have AXO, you have the hip hop architecture camp, NOMA has it, ACE has it. You have all these programs that, not to mention high schools. I know in DC, there's Phelps, which caters to the design. And even in Baltimore, too, there's a school that's dedicated to design. So you have these programs aimed at kids who look like us, right? To encourage them to be in these programs. And it's kind of a twofold question. So first part is how do you deal with kids who look like us versus volunteers who normally don't look like us? And then the second part of it is these kids go to college. and they go to PWIs. How are they handling? Because I struggled in college, and I was in these programs in high school. And as much as they being the Black architects who surrounded me and tried to prepare me for college, I was not prepared for college.
Yeah.
Going back to the first question, how did you deal with the dynamics of mentors who don't look like us to students who look like us?
That's what has burnt me up this entire time. That's the problem, because you're relying on volunteer help. And I'm tapping my Philanoma networks. I'm tapping all the folks that I know that would be amazing in this role, but it's extra. So that's that Black tax that that extra time that you need to spend on things. We were fortunate in Philadelphia because it was more of an urban environment. We were able to make sure that there was some type of representation. If it wasn't the core team, we brought people in to speak. So the teams typically would be the same team and they would be weekly or bi-weekly, but if you're looking at the demographics, and that's what I did, because why wouldn't I would be intentional and say, okay, such and such from this firm, how about I don't assign you to a team this year, but can I have you at least deliver a presentation to this, and this, so I can at least spread the wealth. But that was just getting creative and strategic like that. It takes effort, but that's that equity piece. That's the extra work that you kind of need to do. It was very difficult. And that's part of my challenge with a lot of these programs. And that's why I said I kind of take pause when programs are saying that they diversify the profession, because you're not. Like, my goodness, the first pinch point is college right there. Let's weed them out. My goodness. And what started to weigh on me for being in that position as the executive director for so long, after 7 years, you see people go through college or not. You see people start falling off, like, what do I do, Mrs. Millner? What do I do? Can I switch my major? Can I do it? What does this look like to me? I'm not being supported. I'm asking my teacher, they're talking to me like I'm dumb because I'm not as prepared as the other students. So it's almost like I felt like we were literally sending these kids to the wolves, to be quite honest with you. We'll celebrate them at the end of the year, give them a check that really, whatever nomination it is still going to get split up over like 4 years. What is that really doing for you? And there's no support. It's literally, I hate to say it this way, but I've always felt like these things have just ended up being a PR effort, a photo op, a checkbox for some employee like service group or whatever, just so you could satisfy your community service, but the support wasn't there. So as years go on in these programs, I just hope that they're just being a little bit more conscious of not even like the alumni, because those are the ones who made it, right? Like, can we start being a little bit more intentional about the continued support? And maybe it is some type of partnership or pipeline relationship with like a NOMAS or AIAS or something like that. But once you get them interested, it's really unfortunate that, the support kind of wanes. And, these colleges, whether you go to a HBCU or not, it's difficult. Architecture is not for the weak. And there's publications on that in and of itself, PTSD for real, but it's really hard. So that's why it's like, I've evolved. I spent a lot of years in that mentoring sector and I've seen things. And now for me, it's not really about the recruitment anymore, because I guess I don't know if I've just evolved past that piece, but it's about the retention. Like, how can we get...
It's the retention. Yeah. We don't talk about the retention at all.
It's the retention. And I'm so sick and tired of saying that we need to diversify. I was diversity, but I couldn't be retained. So the diversity is there. Just how are you going to keep it around and support it so it can ascend?
Yeah, I know that NOMA has the HBCU program, and shout out to Anzi. But again, that's HBCU schools. And how small of a network Black architects have, we can affect that. But it's difficult when you hit the PWIs because there's so many schools and you have one student, one Black student that made it through fourth year,
Right.
I've had conversations with so many, and it saddens me that 20 years later, the problems are the same. I feel like, are we really moving the needle? I don't mean to get dark. I just feel that way. And I think that seeing us now more out there, especially Black women, you see us more out there now versus when we were in school. It's encouraging, but still, it's the retention.
It's the retention, the moving the needle piece. So that's like my inner battle, because I deal in research and metrics, and you have to measure it or it doesn't exist and all this. But a lot of this stuff we're talking about is generational work, like moving the needle. Like, how much do we really think we're going to see? That's where I get really kind of messed up, because it's like, you want to see instant gratification. You want to see that, your work is not in vain. And ultimately, the work that I'm doing, I can just pray that my sons see some type of difference in what we did. But it's bigger than architecture. It's society to kind of get on board with this. That's what we know. We have conversations every day, and it's like, well, how do you change hearts and minds? I don't know. I don't know, because we talk about retention. There were firms that I know at the pandemic just accidentally laid off all the color, like just accidentally, like, because I guess they were so excited. Oh, let's staff up, let's diversify the firm. But then it was like, last in, first out. But it's like, wait a minute, did no one pause to see that this was going to be a problem? And then, so don't call me and ask me what to do. What do you think we should do? I don't know. You shouldn't have laid them off. Like, I mean, I can't imagine that everybody has a work performance issue. And, that's always the excuse. It's frustrating, but it's really like a heart and mind kind of shift that needs to happen inside the firm for sure, and then we pride ourselves now, all the architects are doing community service and everybody's going in these marginalized communities, but you don't even have anybody in your office that can relate or talk to people, but you doing all the community service because it's a requirement now.
How are you doing though? Are you tired?
So tired.
For a long time, you dealt with kids and you dealt with their problems.
Yep.
And you had adults too to deal with and their problems. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, and that I know what I can do. I know I have a voice, and what my voice can say can only help those who want to hear it. So it's been a very difficult time for me to even want to talk to students, knowing what I know, seeing them kind of go through the excitement, get excited to a school, and then literally come back home after the first semester, and then trying to regroup and figure out what they were going to do. Because they literally just spent like the past 2, almost 3 years thinking they wanted to be an architect. And architecture school said, nope, this ain't for you. So it's been difficult. There's a lot of talk now, and I'm thankful of it, in terms of promoting alternative career paths and alternative pathways past the firm. And that's where I guess I'm trying to find my resolve, because I guess I am on one of these alternative career paths. I mean, I felt the burn when I left firm life. It's like, are you still an architect when you're not an architect?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to question that sometimes, because people do ask you, what do you still practice? But there are so many things that I've been able to do based on the education that I received in architecture school. Like, it taught me how to think, it taught me how to problem solve, be a strategist, all these things. And that's the piece that I'm just hoping that I try to give to students now. Everybody's on a different path. I can't tell you, and that's, we can't even track students like we used to want, like we want to, because everybody changed their email address. So we have no idea, how to track people. But there's so many people on so many different paths, like almost instantly coming out of that mentoring program. And I was just like, God, do we do them justice? Because it's not cheap. Like,
it's not. This is a very expensive mistake. Kids are coming out here with like straight up mortgage loans. You should have a very fancy car or a house. And architecture school is more expensive than the traditional major.
It sure is, all the stuff. And don't let you get shamed because you got this type of chip or you couldn't afford 3-ply or whatever. I don't even know that they can still make models. I don't know. I'm old.
Yeah, they do.
It's like,
but yeah, you're right. Or even software. Like,
my computer alone right now, I was like, we got to finance this thing. I mean, so if I need this as a working professional, how was a student like, come on, that I'm bringing out of North Philly? Come on, can we talk about equitable playing fields? It's really difficult. So it's challenging when you get people's hopes up. And I was talking to a principal not too long ago. I still dabble in Philadelphia and some nonprofit sectors. And the developer I was working with at the time wanted to talk to the students about real estate development. And they were so excited about it. But the principal was like, well, just hold on because you're going to get them excited. But how are they going to thrive in this? Like, can we just at least try to create some type of expectations and, realizations for this? Not everybody's going to come out of the school and be a real estate developer. There's capital, there's connections, there's network, there's all these things that you're not going to be able to provide them, but you're going to get them excited. So it's just grounding some of these conversations and just considering that some paths aren't meant for others, but can we find alternative pathways to get people where they really want to be?
I want to end on a positive note. I don't mean to do that. You were on the diversity council, and I think that I was on that the AIA's diversity council is no more, or it morphed into something else.
It sure did.
But at the time, I think you were on either before me or after me.
Okay.
Because I was also on the council, and I can't tell you what year I was on in my memory, but that was just something little tidbit, and I thoroughly enjoyed being on that council. I don't know if you did too.
It was good to know that there were like-minded people across the nation. That was, I guess, my first foray in being in national conversations and discussions about what's happening. At the time, I only knew my little microcosm of Philadelphia, and which I felt like was, so this is how it's like all over the country, right? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. There's areas in the country we can't even talk about diversity. It's a bad word, let alone inclusion. What's that? So it was good. And how I got connected to that, it was, again, like my firm, the firm that I was at that I had left twice, the principal in charge, it was right after I wrote the book. And he was like, oh, I got to tell Sherry Snipes about this. And I said, oh, Sherry Snipes.
Shout out to Sherry.
Yes, but that was like my first, he introduced me to that network. So, you asked why I left. I mean, why I came back. Like, there were like moments like that where they would show support, and connections, and like they cared. And I know they did. It's just there are places that were just not aligned.
Yeah. I always say, there's no villains. Everybody, well, there are villains in the world, but in cases like ours, I feel like it's 100% gray, right? Because you're dealing with other people's traumas, other people's backgrounds. Running an architecture firm is extremely difficult. And I'm not giving any excuses to anybody. I'm saying that there's no villains in this story. I mean, there's no one died.
No one died.
No one got murdered.
Not at all. And I absolutely empathize on the client side. I work with developers now, and, developer want a certain thing, developer want a certain thing. It is what it is. And architecture firms, unfortunately, are at the mercy of the hand that feeds them. So,
yeah, I thought that was positive.
That's positive. That's why I don't talk to people. It's never positive.
What's the quote that says behind you?
Oh my goodness. So this is, can you see, is it right side? Is it the right way?
Yeah. Sometimes I do what I gotta do. Sometimes I do what I want to do. Sometimes when I got to do what I want to do, it's the same effing thing.
I got kids. I was like, how can we?
Yeah. Darn.
That was really like, I guess, my mantra when I started doing things on the side. It's, everything that I did in my consultancy, it was something that I wanted to do. It felt like it fed me. And at times I had to do it anyway, because if I was owning it, getting paid for it, but that's what they say, like, if you're doing something you love, you're never working a day in your life, right? So I try to find the alignment sometimes and ask myself, is this something I really want to do? Some days you can't really do that, but most of the time, if you could find alignment in your work that way, you won't become an alcoholic. So we'll try.
1 glass a day versus 5 glasses a day.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a bottle, basically. That's a bottle and a half. Anyways, Tiffany, thank you so much for talking to me and this conversation. I enjoyed it so much. I got to know you a little bit better.
Oh my God, thank you, Melissa. I am definitely looking forward to talking with you more. I am dabbling in some affordable housing stuff in Philadelphia, trying to keep my chops sharp a bit. And so there's definitely some conversations happening in the built environment that I want to get, I guess, more re-engaged in. Working on a national level, sometimes you get disconnected at times. That's why I really felt comfort when I was splitting time in national for the mentoring program. I'm local, but it only benefits things that are happening on national discussions if you at least know what's happening, right? So it's good.
Okay. Whenever you're in DC again, let me know.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Architecture's Political Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it informative or at least entertaining. If you like what you heard, please share with others. You can also connect with Arcus Poly on social media, currently on Instagram as well as Facebook and Twitter. For more information, visit us on our website. It's arcuspoly.online, ARCHIPOLLY.online. I also want to thank our loyal supporters who have been with this podcast for at least 3 years. It means the world to me, and I'm totally grateful to have you part of this community. I will try to bring you the best content as possible, and I can't wait to share more amazing episodes with you. If this is your first time listening or just like a particular episode or all of them, you can support this podcast by going on glow.fm/ArcusPoly. Again, thank you for your support. It means the world to me, and thank you so much for listening.